Hey there, this is Dan. You're watching this LTC, and I am 1 or maybe 2 days away, depending on when this comes out, away from having every single faction in the game published on my channel with a mini breakdown and at least 2 starter lists for that faction. I'm so excited to have finally finished this series, as you will see soon. Don't mind the fact that there's 4 warbands coming out in just a couple days. We'll get to those when we get to them. I'm very excited to have finished this series. Now, for those of you who don't know, I am going to be doing the second edition non-chaos. It should say non-chaos there up at the top. We're talking Hunters of Huanchi, Askurgan Trueblades, Royal Beastflayers, Questor Soulsworn. Now, I've gotten a few comments on the videos where I do bespoke warbands about how come you're showing lists that are multiple boxes, or why aren't you giving me, just how do I win all the tournaments in the world with just the one box? You can't, and I think it's kind of unreasonable to expect to. So what are we actually buying when we buy a one box warband, right? These are essentially starter decks or Vanguard box for AOS or something like that, where you would never expect your starter deck to be at the top of the meta already. I know that Kill Team does have sort of competitively viable kill teams coming out of one box, though the point of that game is not really the list building. In fact, there is no list building in Kill Team. It's very circumscribed that way. For Warcry, when you get one box, you have kind of a smattering of tools that they've given you for that faction, but you don't have enough of any one piece to really dig into a certain playstyle, a certain build path for that little faction. And so that's why I generally say to get 2 boxes or to get a box and an ally. For example, if you just cut out the bad fighters, something like that. When people complain that the bespoke factions just aren't as strong as the AOS factions, I don't think that that's true at all, because when you compare, what one of these starter lists or starter sort of boxes for Warcry does against, say, what one box of AOS does, the bespoke factions are actually usually stronger. The ones that do, I've put them kind of on other places on the channel, but for you to know, things like the box of Gluttons or the Stormcast half of Dominion, things like that. There are ways to get into the game very, very cheap in a competitively viable way, but I don't think it's fair to expect every single bespoke faction to just do that out of one box, because you'd have to make every single fighter unbalanced in the box, and that would just lead to really unhealthy places once people then bought multiple boxes and started actually specializing. So I think that there's a lot of people who maybe aren't necessarily being careful what they wish for when they want one bespoke box to be sort of already competitively viable. And I think even the term competitively viable isn't necessarily something that people should be striving for in their LGS games anyway. So you can sort of compare 2-box bespoke purchases with, say, a 4-box AOS warband, because that's really what you're facing when you face sort of a competitively tuned AOS warband, is usually things from many, many different boxes. And in that sort of situation, I think that the bespoke warbands are a really good purchase, and a lot of them, a lot of the more recent ones especially, are pretty well designed from a kind of interesting gameplay standpoint, and that's something I'm excited to get into today a little bit. The last thing is I won't be doing any sort of only one box, no allies builds, because the only interesting thing to talk about there is sort of, do I glue this weapon on or do I glue that weapon on? And the answer is, do the one that you think looks cooler, because editions change, and the one that's stronger now is going to be the weaker one in the next edition. Now let's get into some more bands. I'm going to start with Hunters of Huanchi. And the biggest highlight to Hunters of Huanchi is the Huanchi's Claw. That is the one kind of here on the bottom left with the skull on his face. You've got durability. I know only 10 wounds, but I'll explain in a minute. Speed, 6-inch move, and a reasonable disruptive ability that's pretty solid. They have enough wounds, essentially, with the durability to use the reaction effectively, where It's really hard to deal 10 damage to something in one attack. You have to have, multiple buffs going or just get really lucky with your dice. There's not a lot of fighters that will just really casually do more than 8 damage. And so because of that, these guys are really good at surviving one hit. And then the Hunters of Huanchi have a reaction where after they've been hit once, they just get to disengage and be out of your range for your next attack. So anytime you start a round in combat with one of them, you're not really going to be able to kill them as easily as you'd like. And they are cheap enough that they can usually use their reaction because they have so many fighters on the board. The other cool thing about Hunters of Huanchi is they have pretty good abilities kind of all around. The Terror Wing ability is sweet. You don't see it a lot because Terror Wings are not incredibly intimidating, but the ability is really cool. Hurled Bolus doesn't suck. You can take away actions. It's kind of cool on monsters where you can take away multiple actions, and a monster action is really, really high impact. The lowlights to Hunters of Huanchi, usually when I have a whole bunch of highlights and only one lowlight, it's because that faction is like one of the very best in the game. And Hunters of Huanchi are solid, but the lowlight is really problematic. Every single fighter profile, other than the Huanchi's Claw, you cannot deal any damage with the Hunters, despite their name. And you're going to really struggle if you have one box where almost all of the profiles are terrible, because there's really only one good fighter in the box. So if you went with 2 boxes, you'll kind of have to scramble around for a real fighting style. And the way I would do it would be this list I've called Bombs Away. Basically, you have to have a Camo Skink Alpha. I would go with the Moonstone Club. I would have 2 Hornblowers, also with Moonstone Clubs, and then 2 Huanchi's Claws. This is only 1 comes per box. It's the one really good fighter in the box. So I'd have 2 here. And then 6 Terra Wings. This is the little pterodactyl friend. And then 1 Camo Skink with the Moonstone Club. The Hornblowers are the ones that can give your Terra Wings bonus moves that then come and deal damage. So it's really like a little dive bomb. It's actually a reasonable rate for what's essentially a rampage, right? A move and then damage as if you attacked. Now, it's not as high impact as some of the other ways to get essentially a rampage on a triple, because you're doing it with a fairly weak fighter in the Terror Wing. But with 2 Hornblowers and 6 Terror Wings, you're never going to run out of the ability to do this. A lot of the time, your opponent will right away just start attacking the Terror Wing that you moved in, because 1, it's fairly fragile, and 2, they don't want to then get attacked by it twice, because generally if whatever you were sort of dive bombing with your Hornblower, if it wasn't in combat with a Terror Wing already, it's because it probably didn't want to be in combat, like it's got a treasure or something. And so that's going to kind of allow you more flexibility to use reactions elsewhere, do all sorts of things, because you're kind of dictating your opponent's lines of play a little bit. So this is a list that is not necessarily the most powerful. You can certainly win objective missions because you have a ton of fighters and you are fast and you have a lot of flying, so you can get onto terrain so that sometimes you can be contesting an objective where no one can attack you, things like that. You can certainly take treasures because the Terror Wings can't pick up treasures, but you can hunt down any treasure carrier, and then your chameleon skinks are very fast and can go grab treasures. The issue is that your dive bomb ability gets you damage onto one thing. You're not doing a lot of damage from attacks. Huanchi's Claws can do some damage when they roll well. That damage can kind of add up pretty quickly. But you're really probably only going to kill 1 or 2 things over the course of the game with this list. So you have to be really cagey and really smart, knowing exactly what it is you're trying to take down and leveraging your 1 or 2 takedowns in a really huge way to go win the game. If we want to transition from this kind of wild and wacky sort of list to something that's maybe a little bit more competitively minded or just a little bit harder, toothier list, you can go with 8 Huanchi's Claws, 1 Camo Skink Alpha, a Company Captain, this is a Kharadron Overlord's ally, and a Kurnoth Huntmaster with a sword. The Huanchi's Claw, it has 2 pretty high impact attacks. Now I know Strength 3, 1, 4 doesn't seem high impact, but we're talking a whole bunch of claws in one area because you're taking 8 of them here. And also this is a ranged attack, so ranged attacks just have inherently higher impact than melee ones do because you're not risking anything by doing them, and because you can usually double attack as you do it. So you're getting a really disproportionate benefit out of the Company Captain, right? Even if it's only giving +1 attack, that's still, 6 attacks instead of 4. And when you get to 8 attacks instead of 4, then you're really doing stuff with your Huanchi's Claws. The other thing, I really like having a Kurnoth Huntmaster because I just really like having a single fighter that can hold its own in a fight in kind of any list I do. I think that you can be really exploitable if you don't have something like that in your list. And so that's why I've got that here. But really what we're looking to do is the incredible utility that the Huanchi's Claw gives you, both with its own ability and with its ability to run around the board, use its reaction to sort of dance around the opponent. We've got 11 fighters here on purpose so that we can have a lot of space for reactions. I think there's just a lot you can do here. If you don't mind not having any fighters that can actually fight, you can certainly drop that Huntmaster for other utility. But I think that being able to actually fight, Warcry is generally a melee game, and even though this is a very sort of dancing finesse warband, I think having that Huntmaster is pretty good. But this list and things like it have done fairly well in a few different events, but it is a very difficult list to play, and it's a very difficult list to make in real life. I would suggest if you get the Games Workshop Box O Skulls, for example, you can just glue skulls onto the regular chameleon skinks that come in the box, and then you can have a bunch of Huanchi's Claws that way. There's a few different ways to do it, but it is a lot of conversion work, and, that's time you could spend elsewhere, if we're being honest. Let's get into the Askurgan Trueblades, and the biggest highlight for them is the Exemplar, which is the leader in my opinion. It's a really perfect sweet spot for the +1 attack Divine Blessing. It's only got 3 attacks, but it's got that Strength 6, 4, 6 profile, and 1 attack, because it's only got 20 wounds, you don't pay quite as much to get an extra attack on it. And once you have an extra attack, it blows things out of the water. It's actually a pretty reasonable fighter even without a Divine Blessing, because you just have a really solid offensive output, and you can kind of put that into a lot of different lists as allies. If you buy Askurgan Trueblades and then decide you don't want to run the whole vampire faction, you'll be able to use this leader in all sorts of warbands for a really long time. The other kind of highlight, I'm going to say the Curse Blood. It's a little weird. I don't think the Curse Blood is very good. However, it's extremely unique design space. It has an ability, I think it's Terrifying Roar, something like that, where everyone around it can't use reactions. And that's really cool, really unique design space. It's the kind of fighter that could become very, very powerful with just a small points adjustment or just a little meta shift from an addition change, something like that. So Curse Blood is the kind of fighter that I like to keep an eye on, even though it's not very good right now. Also, it's a little bit weird because the Askurgan Trueblades are generally pretty immune to counter. They have a lot of high strength fighters and not a lot of attacks, so you're not generally worried about counter. The only fighter that's actually very sort of vulnerable to counter at all is the Cursed Blood itself. So it's kind of an odd situation where it's really only protecting itself with its ability, and I think you would need to be in a situation where you are more afraid for itself and the whole team around it for that ability to be good. But it's such a unique ability that just keep an eye on it, because it's absolutely worth knowing about and kind of knowing when you have access to if you own the Trueblades. Some lowlights. Their cheaper fighters are in a really odd spot. They're not cheap enough to actually get you bodies on the board to score a ton of points, and they're really easy to kill. So it puts you in a really odd spot where they're not that high impact because they don't do a ton of damage. They're also easy to kill, and there's not very many of them, which is kind of scary. So it puts you in a very uncomfortable mid-rangey sort of place with the Trueblades, and that's not usually where you want to be. So the cheaper fighters can be a little bit weird. Luckily, there is the 3-inch range throat taker that mitigates that somewhat, in that you can just avoid fighting with it because you've got the move 5 and the range 3. You can just be very, very careful with it and still get to do a little bit of this and a little bit of that, which is pretty okay. Their abilities are not really geared towards things that actually win Warcry games. That sounds weird, but none of their abilities do any damage. Their fighters use Onslaught really well, but none of their own abilities do any damage. None of their abilities kind of give you extra actions or ways to move around the board. You have, for example, like you can point at someone and say they can't disengage, but that's never useful anyway, because, like, for example, I'd love in treasure missions to stop people from disengaging. Hey, but guess what? In 2nd edition, they made it so you can't disengage with the treasure, things like that. They just have kind of cool sounding abilities that don't actually contribute to winning at all. I think the Curse Blood ability is the same, right? It doesn't progress your game state. It doesn't create any output for you. It just protects you just in case they have reactions. Their abilities are really awkward and very cool sounding, but bad, just in general, and just bad in terms of if you like winning games, their abilities are bad. They're good in if you are the sort of person who treats the Warcry board as a sandbox, then the Trueblades have some good abilities. But if you treat a game of Warcry as a set of objectives that you are here to fulfill or fail to fulfill, then some of the Trueblades fighters are okay, but as sort of a general set of rules, you can just ignore all of their abilities, every single one. So here's what I would do if I were going with 2 boxes and no allies. I would play 2 of the Exemplar because I think the leader is really, really solid. And then I'd have 4 Acolytes with Throat Takers. I would just make all of my Acolytes the ones with the Throat Takers. They're the 3-bladed staff, 3-piece staff with little ropes, and they have the 3-inch range, which is important. You can do things with these Acolytes like disengage and then attack, and then when they catch up to you and attack, you disengage and attack. So you can just constantly be sort of harassing and being really annoying with them. And you can avoid actually getting in any real fights. Now, that's not good if you're actually trying to really try to kill something, but if you're just trying to keep someone busy, you can absolutely do that with them, and it can be really powerful in certain situations. And they're also okay for when you have to hunt something down, because you just have that long 8-inch threat range. Even though you're not dealing a ton of damage, at least you can get an attack in and hope to roll a couple 6s, something like that. The other thing you're trying to do with this list is just use Onslaught. It's the only ability that you have. Keeps it really simple. The Askurgan Trueblades are a really easy warband to play in that way. And you can just say, you have the Ascetic with Charnel Mace. That's the one with only 2 attacks, but strength 6. Then you've got the Askurgan Exemplar. You can just use Onslaught on those, and you don't have to worry about anything else. You just you just pump up those attacks, those very low number, high impact attacks, and you can get a lot done, and you can just focus all of your wild dice on just making more doubles to get more damage out. This is a really cool warband, only in that it's just very straightforward to play. It's a very good beer and pretzels type of list, and I think that that's fun. Now, if you do want to get kind of weirder with Askurgan Trueblades, I would go with this like Total Abomination list of them. And I think that this list is pretty powerful. So, like I said before, the exemplars are a really good example of something that can take a +1 attack divine blessing. That's the ferocious blessing, and do really well. So at 230 points, the ferocious Askurgan exemplar is an incredible damage piece, but it is very, very fragile. Divine blessings in general, it's very rare. There's very few fighters where a blessing makes a good fighter really great. And there's also very few fighters where a blessing makes a bad fighter good. In fact, I don't think there's any. But what does happen a lot is a blessing turning, like just kind of changing a fighter a little bit, where now this is a heavy hitting glass cannon, as opposed to just like a offensive bespoke leader, just like an offensive foot slogging leader. Now we are in like full, all the eggs are in this one basket territory, but if it pops off, it's really popping off. And so you have two of them to go really crazy with, to do a ton of damage with. And then outside of that, I really think you want to be filling your warband with a lot of chaff, a lot of like efficient stuff that can really do one job. And so I've got these move 3 folks in the Sepulchral Guard. This is the all skeleton Underworlds warband that's out there. The Champion, the Harvester, and the Petitioner with Sword are all just like hyper efficient, cheap fighters that cost nothing, give you an activation, and then are surprisingly damage efficient when they actually do end up attacking, which is pretty good to have. And then there's these 3 dire wolves to sort of run around the board. So you have pretty good numbers here in terms of your 9 fighters. This is the exact kind of warband that kind of pisses people off when they watch my channel, because they don't like that Warcry essentially begs you to take allies. I get probably comments on every single one of these list building videos like, can you please show more lists with no allies? Even though I think I have at least one list with no allies on every single faction. And the reason is I think it's very reasonable for people to, when they look up a faction in one of these videos, they want to know how to run that pure faction. And the thing is that right now, Games Workshop has made it really clear, and the designers of Warcry have made it really clear that they don't want lists to look like this. They don't want you to be playing sort of just, the cool fighters in your faction that are just kind of innocent and living their lives, right? Everything they've done in terms of their sort of list building rules makes it very clear that if you don't play like this, you are losing on purpose, essentially. The only faction in the game that can really do a lot with no allies, I might be taking it back as soon as I say it, but I was going to say Kharadron Overlords. Horns of Hashut might be able to do it too, but for the most part, with no allies, there just aren't any factions that can actually survive. Maybe Soulblight Gravelords. Soulblight Gravelords and KO are really the ones I would say. Other than that, like, you just can't do it. And that's in a competitive standpoint. Now, for casual play, yes, you can absolutely play lists like this. And I encourage you to buy 2 boxes of exemplars and play this list. Of Trueblades and play this list. But, if you're kind of trying to get a little more hard-edged with your Trueblades, GW has made it really clear that they want you playing lists that look more like this. Now, this list, I do think, is a reasonable fluff list, a reasonable lore list, and I just want to read it out to you, right? Hear me out. So, these ferocious Askurgan exemplars have lost all control, right? They've gotten this divine blessing, but really it's just a more advanced version of their Soulblight curse, and they've lost all control. And of course, the Askurgan Trueblades are renowned throughout the realms of death and the realm of beasts as being the vampires who have done the best of all the vampires at controlling the negative side effects of the Soulblight curse, right? They're all about their self-control. And so these 2 exemplars that have gone totally off the deep end, the rest of the Askurgan Trueblades refuse to hang out with them. They like refuse to associate with them. So of course they've made friends with these like bestial dire wolves. Of course they like have teamed up with these sort of random skeleton warriors from the underworlds of the GW universe, right? Of course, they've kind of gone out and done their own thing. So, if anything, it would be weird to have a ferocious Askurgan exemplar in a regular Askurgan Trueblades list. So, that would be my lore reason for playing this, even though I know that just approaches like this make a lot of players mad. And so, I just wanted to kind of put that out there so that you know that at least I know that a lot of you guys don't like when I post lists like this, but GW really wants us to play this way. And so, you don't have to. You can play this way if you want to, but also you should at least know that this kind of stuff exists and that you can build lists that look like this. Royal Beastflayers. I think they're really cool. The main reason they have not one, but two like real build around abilities that are really neat. The Beastflayer Baron has Sound the Hunt. The Royal Flaymaster has Pack Tactics, and both of those abilities are really good and really interesting, to build a list around because the requirements for a list are really different for each one to maximize them. And I also really like that both fighters are good enough that they don't feel like attacks. So that you can build around these abilities and you don't feel like you're just losing because you have to include this terrible fighter just to have the good ability. The Royal Flaymaster is significantly better than the Beastflayer Baron, but the Beastflayer Baron is not like completely worthless out there, and so I think that's really good. The lowlights on the Beastflayers, there's not a lot of like combat efficiency with them. You really need to lean on your abilities to win. Now, the Flaymaster is not like a pathetic fighter by any means. She's really good. And the ghouls are, reasonable for their points. They're very, very cheap at 55 points. It's just there's not a lot here that's going to outfight the opponent's stuff point for point, right? And that's why you need to lean on those abilities. But they are very powerful. So with just one box and an ally, you can just drop the really terrible fighters, which are the Ghur Squires. Ghur Squires are in this really awful points space where they're 95 points for a fighter that essentially doesn't do much that a ghoul doesn't do. And so you really just want to get rid of them. The Vargulf Courtier gives you a really great mobile source of damage. And the only downside here is it doesn't really synergize with the Baron's ability or the Flaymaster's ability all that well. Giving it 8-inch move with the Baron is nice. The problem is the triple that you use to do that then takes away from the triple that would really supercharge the Courtier's damage output. So, it's not like a total non-bow, but it is like they're really competing for dice. However, even in that situation, this Courtier is going to be more effective more of the time than those 3 Ghur Squires would be, because those Ghur Squires are doing nothing for you. Otherwise, I do think you can have a lot of fun with this because you still have some decent numbers. You have 8 fighters here and some ghoul trackers, so you can use pack tactics, and you can do a lot of damage with that Courtier, who also fits because he's a Flesh Eater Courts fighter. So he's kind of on theme with the Beastflayers. However, what I would be really excited about with Beastflayers personally would be really building specifically for each ability. And so here's one for pack tactics. I would have a ferocious Royal Flaymaster, a regular Royal Flaymaster, an Offal Hound, and 9 ghoul trackers. Now first, just a note on the Divine Blessing here. That's not because I think ferocious Flaymasters are some sort of broken piece in the meta. I just think this list had 25 points left over, and I'd rather upgrade the Flaymaster than turn the Offal Hound into a not very good ally. The thing that I'm really excited about here is getting 2 Flaymasters, so you have 2 different ways to use pack tactics. You can still use it even if one of them dies. And then 9 ghoul trackers is what I'm actually excited about, is the ability to sort of surround an opponent with ghouls and maybe your Offal Hound. You can do kind of cheeky things, like you can attack it with the Offal Hound, which is kind of harder to kill. And that can be the only thing within 1 inch of it. And then you can surround it with ghouls at like 1.25 inches away. And then you can do pack tactics and do like a bajillion damage to it via the ability. You can do really fun, silly things like that. This is a list where you have so many numbers that you're going to be in a really good spot on objective missions. The incredible damage output means that on certain kill missions and in certain treasure missions, you're going to do okay too. I just really like what this list is giving you and just all the options that this list is giving you. I have seen a little bit of sort of Royal Beastflayer action out there, and it was a mostly pack tactics centered list, and it was pretty good. I think the pilot ended up pretty happy with it when they took it to the Nova Open. So I do think that there's a lot of gas in this tank for people to play around with, and if I was going to take it to a tournament, now I only have 1 box of Flaymasters or Flayers, but this is how I would do it. Sound the Hunt is the ability where the Beastflayer Baron can give a free move action to multiple fighters who are near them. And I think that that's really good in a couple different ways. You're either sort of helping really slow fighters get up the board, or you are really just shooting a fast fighter out of a cannon all the way across the board. So in this situation, I am going the first of those options. I'm trying to move some really efficient slow fighters up the board. So I've got the Royal Flaymaster, 2 Beastflayer Barons, King Morlach Velmorn, who is a pretty reasonable fighter in his own right, and then Thane, fourth and last, Marshal Falk Velmorn, who is a legend of the game, and then Helmar the Hewer. I've also got an Offal Hound and 2 Ghoul Trackers here because not everyone can start in a deployment zone with the Beastflayer Baron, and so you want faster fighters in whichever deployment is not going to have the Baron in it, and so that's where I would put my Offal Hound and my Ghoul Trackers. But this is a 10-fighter warband. It has both efficiency and sort of synergy and impact, which is a really nice sort of twosome to have, where you've got these very slow but very, very points efficient on their combat stats fighters from Soulblight Gravelords, these essentially Graveguard that are very, very good, and then a way to sort of deliver them to objectives, to your opponent, right? Normally these move 3 warbands can actually be pretty bad in things like kill missions or treasure missions where they all of a sudden can't hunt anything down. The Beastflayer Baron is really going to help them do that. The Offal Hound is good at doing that. The Flaymaster is okay at doing that. So this is another warband with kind of a lot of different things going on and power that's going in a lot of different directions, which can be really nice and give you a lot of tools. Remember that also King Morlach is able to resurrect his little pet kids at full strength. So this is, you're running with kind of the pre-nerf resurrection here. You've got multiple movement abilities. Pack tactics is not going to be very good in this warband, but that's kind of okay because you've got so many other things happening at once. So I think that this would be a really powerful way to do it. And I just think in general, Royal Beastflayers are one of the powerful factions that has not been explored yet. And I think I'm really excited for people to try out either of these 2 types of builds, really. And I think it could bear a lot of fruit for folks. Finally, we've got the Questor Soulsworn. And the biggest highlight to them, I think, is that they are awesome allies. All of them can hand out free moves to allies. And then all of them have at least one good ability that is sort of extra to that. Now, maybe not all of them are good. For example, the Lord Relictor has a really trash teleport that a lot of people are really excited about, or were when they came out. I think you don't hear a lot about it now because the few people who tried it had a bad time. Never ever build around quads, people. But other than the Lord Relictor, all of them have a really good or really interesting ability on top of being able to hand out free moves, which is a really great place to be as far as allying them into other warbands. They've also apparently got a lot of power in AOS because they do real damage, and a Lord Imperatant can let them deep strike within 7. So they're essentially like a bigger group of annihilators, which I guess is pretty powerful. Now, I'm kind of reaching for highlights for them because they are really, really cool, but man, they are not good. As a self-contained faction, they are essentially unplayable. The reason is, if you are going to have an elite faction, you need to be very offensive because you need to be able to kill your opponents and reduce their numbers to catch up to them on points scoring. So whether it's like treasures, where they are going to be able to swarm treasures, spend actions picking up treasures, etc., block you off from, body block you away from where the treasure carrier is, and you just need to be able to mow through them to get to where you need to go. If it's objectives, you need to reduce their numbers really, really fast so that you catch up to them on numbers on the objectives. If it's a kill mission, then you're going to be favored, but only if you can actually kill them, because if they can just kind of all swarm onto one and then take it down before you've killed a whole bunch of them in return, that's a really bad spot for you. So elite warbands need to be very, very killy. And that's just not what the Questor Soulsworn are. They're an entire faction entirely built of support heroes. Now, support heroes can be very good in Warcry, but you really can't have more than 2 of them in a list. And this is a faction with 6 support heroes, and that is unplayable, completely unplayable. So don't try. Well, in casual games, you can do it. Stormcast can do okay in a lot of casual games, but otherwise you're just going to have a really tough time. They also have kind of the issue that every fighter in the warband, because I think they've got these really cool abilities, but I think Games Workshop thinks that those abilities are like really good. All of them are just about 10 or 15 points too expensive. So none of them are very points efficient as fighters. And so when you bring in an ally specifically to do a job, a support job, a 15-point tax isn't a disaster. You can make that up, especially if the ability is good. But as a faction, 90 points worth of tax is a total disaster, especially because on any given round, only 2 of them are going to be using their awesome support abilities, right? The other ones aren't going to be using it. And so that efficiency tax is going to really hurt. It's going to compound every single activation you have where you're not using a good ability, is just going to be a complete disaster for you in terms of actual board impact you're having over the course of each round. So I really want to make sure that people are clear that you shouldn't be sad if you pick up Questor Soulsworn and they don't work, because you still have a really awesome warband. Just think of them as the Gabapalooza, right? You can't buy the Gabapalooza for Gloomspite Gitz and then have a Gloomspite Gitz warband. It doesn't work that way, right? You buy the Gabapalooza and now you have a really awesome Ironjawz warband, or you have a really awesome Cruel Boys warband, or Ogre warband, because that's how the Gloomspite Gitz work. I would say that that's also how Questor Soulsworn works. A cool word to the wise about Questor Soulsworn is it comes in 2 identical sprues, and each sprue can build every single option in the warband. So if you wanted, you could build your favorite fighter twice, which is cool. Or, and this is what I would suggest most people do, you could buy the Questor Soulsworn, find a friend, sell half of it, the other sprue, to your friend, and now both of you have the Questor Soulsworn. Because really, right now, this is a faction where you buy them to have them as allies in your other warbands. I would generally usually use 1, but I'll show you 2 lists that use 2 of them to really kind of make a warband that isn't Questor Soulsworn feel like a Questor Soulsworn warband. And here's my first example. So Gyran Guard. This is the the Stormcast Chamber that are all from a single tribe of warriors that fought fighting against Nurgle alongside Alariel and her Sylvaneth in the War of Life. They usually sort of fight for the living city, things like that. They're always fighting in Gyran. And I would just imagine my Questor Soulsworn as being Gyran Guard and working with the Sylvaneth here. So I would have a ferocious Kurnoth Huntmaster with Scythe, and I would have these two Questors who either one can just give it a free move. And now with its 2-inch range, you can often give it a free move so that it is within striking distance of 2 different fighters of the opponent, and then it's going to be able to kill one with 1 attack and kill the other with the other attack, because you're giving it the +1 attack on ferocious. And then you can, of course, it can onslaught. Your free move ability is going on just a single, just a double. And so you're usually going to have dice left to use it, which is amazing. Then I would also have another Kurnoth Hunter with Scythe just to take a second buff if you want to. The Duelist I've chosen here because you're pretty low on numbers. And what the Duelist can do is it can run up to a deployment group and pop its ability, which says that if you are within 3 inches of the Duelist, you can't move except to close in on the Duelist. And so you can take an entire deployment group of a Swarm Warband, and you can tell them, all of you have to move attack the Duelist, all of you have to go after me. And then their numbers count for nothing on objectives because they can't get to the objectives because they have to attack the Duelist. And none of them have strength 5 because you have toughness 5. And so they're going to need to roll really, really well to actually clear that Duelist off the board. So I really like the Duelist specifically in an elite warband, even though, you know, normally you don't want support wizards in your elite warbands. This one, it kind of works because you've got your really offensively scary fighter, and you've got some chaff here too. Those Spite Revenants are giving you nets to kind of throw off balance any fighters that could potentially go toe-to-toe with your Kurnoth Huntmaster, and that will allow your Questors to really be throwing it around the board kind of with impunity, knowing that you've already locked down your opponent's ability to deal with the Huntmaster on even terms. So I really like this this warband. It has a lot of play to it. It just doesn't have a lot of bodies for objective missions, but hopefully that's what the Duelist is here to fix. So I think you've got a lot of cool options for kind of doing it that way. Another way to play a Questor Soulsworn warband is in Kharadron Overlords, where you are using your free move ability really now just to accelerate these high impact for their size little dwarves. So you've got your Arcanaut Admiral, who is an incredible combat piece, who is maybe not necessarily the fastest, right? But who really wants to be doing fight for profit with +2 attacks to sort of super boost the whole team, right? You've got the 5 Arcanauts with Spear, but they've got 3 high impact attacks. Your Errant Questor with Grand Hammer has 3 high impact attacks. Your Errant Questor with Spear has 3 high impact attacks. So you are wanting to give this Admiral these free moves to be able to get it into position to go put fight for profit on a place where it'll get +2 attacks everywhere. And then after that, you're really cooking, because then you're going to have entirely a warband made of fighters who really go crazy when they've got that fight for profit buff on them. And that's a great spot to be. So I think this is another warband where just 2 Questor Soulsworn in the warband, but it's going to feel like a Questor Soulsworn warband, and I think that would be really fun. I also made a video putting a Questor Prime in a Daughters of Cain list. You can check out my order videos, and if you like these videos in general, if you've liked this series in general, please put a like onto this video. It helps other people find the series, and also consider subscribing. I'm really excited to have finally finished it. And hopefully I haven't discouraged you from purchasing Questor Soulsworn, because even though they're really terrible on their own, they are really, really good more generally. So I will be back with more Warcry videos that are maybe not necessarily pure list building, which I'm excited to finally get into other aspects of the game. Maybe even a couple tactics videos, something like that. And until then, may all your rolls be crits.